Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. Thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. They say 24 hours is not enough, but believe you me, the last 24 hours has, I think, taken everyone's breath away. We had, of course, Iran attacking the American base in Qatar, and then just a few hours after that, Donald Trump announced that a ceasefire had been agreed between Iran and Israel. Of course, the US president has asked both nations to go ahead and honor this ceasefire. I tell you what, it has been one of those days in the history of our world. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome to take to this discussion further the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Five Pillars, Roshan Muhammed Salih. Roshan, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and shukran so much for joining us.
Welcome, salam, brother. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolute pleasure having you on. Here's the thing, Roshan. I read one of your it used to be called tweet, but it's you X'd. When you said you were quite surprised that Iran decided to launch this attack on the Ubaid base in Doha.
Yeah.
I myself was surprised by that because you mentioned it that Bahrain could have been an option for Iran. I was thinking even the United Arab Emirates. So when you saw all of this unfolding, what were your immediate reactions to it?
Yesterday, a friend from Qatar was texting me and saying how worried he was and for himself and his daughter. And I was like, no, don't worry. They're not going to attack Qatar. They're not going to attack Qatar because Qatar is one of Iran's allies in the region. And then I was quite shocked when I saw it. And I was scratching my head to a certain extent. I thought, what an odd choice of target, because there are Iran's enemies in the region. There are states like Bahrain, the UAE, with US air bases, etc., and they are allied with Israel and the West against Iran. So I thought that might have been a more logical choice of target. But I think, having mulled it through a little bit, I think perhaps there was a level of coordination between the Qataris and the Iranians and the Americans on this one, so that Iran could fire back and get a measure of revenge for the attack on their nuclear facilities, but in a way that wouldn't create death, that wouldn't create too much destruction. So I think they probably agreed with Qatar to do this. And also we have to admit that the US main military base in the region is actually in Qatar. It might seem like a contradiction, but it's in Qatar. And that was the CENTCOM, is where the US, basically organizes its military operations throughout the Middle East and beyond. It was used to launch attacks on Iraq and Afghanistan. I was actually living in Qatar, and I saw the planes and the helicopters taking off from Doha towards Iraq at that time. So it's from the Iranian point of view, it's a very logical choice and a legitimate target, given that it is the base of American operations in the Middle East. But nevertheless, because Qatar is an Iranian ally, I was a little bit surprised.
Yeah, here's the thing, right? The revolutionary forces and obviously its partner, the actual Iranian forces itself, had given warning to Qatar. So, I mean, I had spoken to friends also in Doha immediately when this attack happened, when I was watching it on Al Jazeera. I said, okay, let me go ahead and check on them. And they said, well, look, we were warned about it. But the thing is, hearing about something and seeing it is two completely different perspectives. When they, of course, were at a shopping mall at the time, when they saw these missiles flying, a lot of panic had come into the air. And of course, naturally so. But the fact that there was a warning, there's two answers to it. Of course, Iran saying to Qatar, listen, we are still your partners in this. We are doing this to go ahead and get back to the United States. But also, number two, to try and send a message to the Americans at the same time to say, listen, you've done what you've done 36 hours or 48 hours before. This is just retaliatory from our side.
Yeah, I think everyone wants to de-escalate. I think the Iranians, obviously, they've been hit quite hard. I mean, not as hard as I think people are talking about regime change in Iran, but I think the government is very secure. There's no opposition that could take it down. But nevertheless, Iran has had several military commanders assassinated, many military institutions bombed. So they're probably looking to de-escalate, as they are the weaker party in this, militarily I'm speaking, in this whole affair. I think the Israelis as well are looking to de-escalate. They're not used to being bombed. They're not used to taking on an adversary that can fire back, which Iran can. And they're a small country. Their population isn't used to getting bombed like this. They have I call it kind of a weak mentality, a weak kind of Western type mentality. They're not used to getting, fire back at them. And therefore they have not much capacity to take pain. Whereas the Iranians and generally Muslims, having experienced bombing for so long, in our history, we're more used to take that economic, physical pain, etc. And also the Americans probably are looking for de-escalation as well. I don't think they want to get dragged into a war of attrition with Iran, and nor do the Israelis, by the way, because they prefer short, sharp wars rather than long wars. So I think everyone here is probably looking to de-escalate.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on the United States in the next segment, Roshan. Roshan, here's the thing, right? Qatar, of course, responded by saying they condemn it. They've been a country that has been seen as the mediator, especially when you look at the genocide that is happening in Gaza. They've been this mediator between Hamas and Israel. When you look at Qatar as a country, and of course you stay there, this is who they are. They are just mediators. They are the reasonable heads within the Middle East. And of course, they want to continue to play that role. They've said it. We want to be the mediators in the Middle East, not just the Middle East, but also with regards to world politics, when you look at, of course, the war between Russia and Ukraine right now.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in Qatar for 2.5 years, and I go back reasonably regularly as well. I went back last year, and I know the country very well. It's just full of contradictions. On the one hand, you have the support for the Palestinian cause. You have Al Jazeera, which is a media powerhouse for the global South, and to a certain extent the Arab and the Muslim world. You have them taking reasonable positions on most international issues. You have them mediating, etc. They hosted the Taliban. On the other hand, they have a huge American airbase there, which is used to dominate the region. And they are very in cahoots with the West. I mean, they own half of London. They own football clubs around the world, Paris Saint-Germain, and they're very embedded into the West. So they have two constituencies, the Arab and Muslim world and the West. And they try to play both constituencies and give both constituencies, a few carrots, basically, here and there. And the reason why this is because they're a small nation. They're tiny, and they're vulnerable to attack, especially from Saudi Arabia. And small nations tend to try to play several constituencies off against each other as a matter of trying to survive and thrive. And that's what Qatar has done. And I think that's the best way of trying to understand Qatar's contradictory foreign policy.
Yeah. Before we go to the break, Roshan, I didn't know whether I needed to laugh or just scratch my head. So the United Kingdom, of course, had said that they are getting their troops ready just in case this goes ahead and escalates even further. And I was thinking, surely Keir Starmer won't pull out a Tony Blair move right here.
No, I mean, Keir Starmer, I don't think he wants to go to war. I don't think the British people have an appetite for another war, although Britain is going quite right-wing in its domestic politics. But even the right-wingers here, I don't think want to get involved in another foreign entanglement after Iraq and Afghanistan. They may play a kind of a junior partner role, where they might send a few planes if this does escalate further. I mean, if this does escalate further and Britain is forced to choose a side, we all know what side they're going to choose. Yeah. It's the Americans and the Israelis. But even if it comes to that, Britain is a declining power in the world, Brother Faraz. It isn't the Great Britain of the British Empire in the 19th century anymore. So even if they do get involved, it will be at a political level, a very junior military level. I don't think they will be as involved as they were in Iraq and Afghanistan, for example.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Roshan Muhammed Salih, the editor-in-chief and co-founder of 5 Pillars. We're, of course, discussing the events that had happened, of course, the ceasefire agreement between Iran and Israel, as announced by Donald Trump, and of course the attack on the Al Udeid airbase in Qatar. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, Donald Trump on his very own social media platform had said that a truce had been announced. And of course, a phrase he's been using now over the last few days, it is time for peace. Roshan, I don't know when it comes to Donald Trump whether he needs to wear this sort of Captain America suit or he needs to wear the suit worn by Ronald McDonald, because I'm trying to understand this man. I mean, it's 72 hours before all of this, he had went ahead and bombed an Iranian nuclear facility, and now all of a sudden he's putting his hand up as this man of peace. It's quite paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah, he's the paradox, isn't he? That's what makes him quite dangerous, I think. I think generally we know, American presidents are predictable, whereas Donald Trump is genuinely not predictable. And I think he listens to the last person, who he's spoken to in the room he agrees with, or something like that, I don't think he's got a fixed ideology. I think he's a very transactional president. I don't think he's very, he's not that well versed in world affairs either. But I think we have to assume that the Americans and the Israelis were planning this and coordinating it all along. I think that, sometimes it's difficult to who knows who's wagging whose tail. Is it the Americans wagging the Israelis' tail, or is it the other way around? But I do think the Americans and the Israelis were coordinating this attack on Iran's nuclear facilities for quite a while, and they were sending out mixed signals. They were pretending to everybody that there was some kind of rift between the Americans and the Israelis. The Americans were conducting talks with the Iranians about the nuclear issue on the one hand, while all this planning was going on in the background. So I think there's lots of smoke and mirrors here, but I think one thing we can say for sure is that the Americans and the Israelis, hatched this plot all along.
Roshan, I'm watching, and I'm sure you were also when this attack at Al Udeid was occurring. I'm thinking Benjamin Netanyahu is smiling from east to west, because this is exactly what he wanted, to continue this war with Iran. And then all of a sudden, a few hours later, Donald Trump makes this announcement. And of course, reading between the lines, reading what the Israeli government is saying right now, they say, well, we're monitoring what's going to happen. Iran needs to be the first nation to abide by the ceasefire agreement. But there's a sense of frustration in Tel Aviv, isn't it? Because they were hoping that by the attack at Al Udeid base, this would have taken the US into a whole new level as a pure ally in trying to go ahead and not only destabilize Iran, but also maintain this war in a much more brutal way.
Yeah, I'm in two minds about this, whether the Israelis want a long war or not. I think generally, even David Ben-Gurion, the founder of Israel, the first president of Israel, said that one of the maxims of the Israeli state should be not to have long wars, because they're a small state and they just can't sustain long wars. So I'm not sure if Benjamin Netanyahu did want this to escalate or drag on for too long, simply because of the effect it would have had on Israel. On the other hand, he did talk, and the fact is that he's already won a bit of political capital now. He's very unpopular in Israel. And if there was an election held tomorrow, he would lose it. But I think every time he launches a war against either the Palestinians or the Lebanese or the Syrians or the Iranians, domestically his popularity goes up and he gains more political capital, and he'll stay in power. Then he won't have to be impeached and go to jail. On the other hand, I think if the Americans had the appetite to take out, to do regime change, then I'm sure Israel would be happy about that. But I mean, I'm someone who knows Iran a little bit myself. I've been there a couple of times. In a previous life, I even worked for Iranian TV station, so I kind of know their mentality. And I'm pretty sure that the regime in Iran is solid. And it has. I mean, there are lots of people that oppose it, but there are millions who support it wholeheartedly and ideologically are wedded to its principles, and they would fight for the death for the regime. So I don't see any cohesive opposition movement in Iran either. But that said, there are lots of traitors from the Iranian perspective in Iran that would probably try to destabilize as much as possible Mossad agents, etc., and they've already done this. So yeah, I'm really in two minds about whether Israel wanted a long war or a short war. I can see advantages and disadvantages from the Israeli perspective in both scenarios.
There's something interesting you've mentioned, Roshan, about Israel domestically. Now, of course, Yair Golan, who is the opposition to the actual coalition in Israel, has said now is the time to negotiate for a ceasefire in Gaza, right? And then you've got the two right-wingers in Israel, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who have come out and said, listen, this needs to continue against Iran because we need to see this country completely destabilized. And then, of course, you've got families of the hostages who are calling out for Benjamin Netanyahu to go ahead and have the ceasefire so that all of the hostages can be released. Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure, isn't he? And now with this ceasefire coming into effect, that very same conversation is going to be shifted onto his lap as the Prime Minister of Israel.
Yeah, so you just outlined the internal contradictions of Israel itself. And, obviously we tend to look from the outside at Israel as if it's one unified body. It isn't. You have deep divisions between the secularists, the religious zealots, the left, the right, etc., in Israel, and they're all at each other's throats. And poll after poll over the last few years, even during wartime, has proved that Benjamin Netanyahu is a very unpopular prime minister, and he will go to jail if he's out of power because there's so many corruption cases against him and other cases. Israel, a very, very divided society, a very weak society internally in terms of coalition governments. And you have real hardliners in the government. This is called, every Israeli government we know is hardline, but this is probably the most hardline in history. The religious element, the extreme right-wing element, headed by Smotrich and Ben Gvir, as you said, is gaining ground, intrinsic part of the coalition, but even in Israeli society is gaining ground. And there's no such thing as the left wing anymore in Israel, if there ever was. I personally think that, looking at this from an Islamic perspective, a global Islamic perspective, that there is no probably military solution at the moment. Israel does have this military superiority, which is quite overwhelming over the whole region. But it's a society that may well destroy itself through its own internal contradictions, its low birth rates, and the Palestinians still sticking around and refusing to leave, refusing to surrender. And I think also we have to look ahead into the future. I think America is a changing country itself. It's becoming a more Hispanic country. It's pivoting towards China. Will it still want to have this ideological fixation with this outpost in the Middle East, while the Middle East itself is coming to the end of the energy age with oil and gas running out and will become less strategic as a result? So I think at the moment, Israel obviously is secure, even though it has been tarnished in the eyes of world opinion. Everyone can see that it is a racist state now. It is a genocidal state. It's a rogue regime. That has become clear even in the West, where I live, where Israel is usually supported. We have a majority of the population now having a negative view of Israel rather than a positive view. But I think give this some time. I was speaking to my colleague Yvonne Ridley a few days ago. You might remember her.
Sure, yes.
And she was predicting that this would be the end of Israel, or this is the beginning of the end of Israel. And I think at the moment, the Western mainstream media may be portraying this as a military victory for Israel. But in the long run, I can see 2020, the period 2023 to 2025, historians looking back and saying, actually, this was the beginning of the end for the apartheid Zionist regime.
Roshan, just one final question. Out of this conflict that has, of course, gone on for the last 12 days, who comes out stronger? From my perspective, I'm leaning towards Iran because they're still looking to abide by the AEIA in terms of its uranium output. They're still looking to be on the negotiating table with every nuclear watchdog. But from Roshan, your perspective, who comes out as the most stronger from what we have seen in this last 12 days?
Yeah, so if it is over, assuming that there is a ceasefire which holds, interesting question. I think Iran still effectively has its nuclear program intact. I don't think the American attack was completely successful. It probably might have put them back a few years, but ultimately, I think the centrifuges and the enriched uranium has been hidden. Probably Iran has secret facilities. Its regime is still intact. Its political and military leadership is still intact. Might have been hit quite hard, but it's still intact. They still have control over the country. I think their stock has gone up in the Muslim world in particular. Obviously their stock would have gone down because of Syria and Iraq, but now even Sunnis like myself and many others probably think more of Iran than we did, a few weeks back. Whereas Israel, obviously, they will say that they have, or the Americans and the Israelis, they will say that they have put back the Iranian nuclear program. I mean, Trump is even saying he's obliterated it. Take that with a pinch of salt, I think. They will say that they've harmed or really hindered Iran's ability to be a regional superpower. They've taken out its allies, etc., etc. So I think if we count the military cost, we could probably say that Israel has come out on top without defeating Iran. But it's not just about the military equation, is it? It's about the political equation, the economic equation, and many other equations. And I think if you look at it in the round, you can make an argument for both cases, and it's probably too early to call. But Iran certainly hasn't been defeated, put it that way. And from their perspective, I think they will present it as a victory, and they will live to fight another day.
Roshan, absolute pleasure having you on. Hope to have you again on our show soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
That's Roshan Muhammed Salih, editor-in-chief and co-founder of 5 Pillars. Okay, after the break, we're going to be shifting to Gaza. I'm going to be speaking to Dr. Anat Mata from Tel Aviv. She's a recently retired from the Department of Philosophy at that university. And of course, she was one of those who was part of a number or hundreds of Israeli academia that joined South Africa's case at the ICJ against Israel for genocide. I'll be speaking to her after the break.